Hatuwezi kuwa madikteta tuwaambie lazima mfanye hivi, hapana. Na nimesikia watu wengine wetu hapa wanasema lazima wafanye hii, lazima, hapana. Lazima, hapana. Unasema tu ni vizuri. Ni vizuri kama wangeungana na sisi, si ndio? Hatuwezi kufanya uchaguzi ya chama kama uchaguzi inakaribia ile ya national, sita tukoroga. Sasa heri saa hii kama kiumane saa hii ndio tujue vile ya kujipanga.
In the leadership of President William Ruto there is some shareholding katika uongozi wake.
Rikiji, ukikuja Ukambani, pea Wakamba heshima. Usitukane Kalonzo.
Hata juzi tumekuwa kwa ikulu usiku, Kalonzo amefika. Alikuwa pale, amekuja na giza. Mbona hawezi kuja mchana?
Akianza kuongea Kalonzo, akiendelea Kalonzo, akimaliza Kalonzo.
Mbona hawajafukuza Kalonzo kwa Azimio? Kama hawa MPs waliketi na rais wako na makosa, Kalonzo amekuja pale na amekula chakula, amefungwa kitambaa hapa ya white, amekula vizuri nini. Siku hiyo ndio ya kufukuzwa.
This is our father. If you don't respect him, we will not respect you.
Hatutaki mivutano ya siasa. Hawa wananchi wametimiza sehemu yao, wametuchagua. Sasa ile deni tuko naye ni deni ya kuwafanyia kazi hawa wananchi.
We are not happy when somebody comes here more than 30 minutes. The person you're speaking about is His Excellency Kalonzo. More than 30-45 minutes ikiongelewa maneno ya mtu moja. Wajamani, enda waambie huyu pia ni mtoto wetu.
Na waomba viongozi katika taifa letu la Kenya tushirikiane. Siasa tulimaliza wakati wa uchaguzi, sasa ni nafasi yetu kuungana.
And I want to assure my critics that I am one of the few people who cannot be intimidated or blackmailed or coerced into following a certain opinion simply because you think you are too brilliant or too right than anybody else.
Wako na nia ya kuintroduce mswada kwa bunge ya kufanya ati president anaweza kuwa na limitless terms, akae mpaka maisha yake yote. Hiyo maneno yote tunajua na sisi hatutakubali. Hapo wakienda hapo ndio tutawachania njia.
Sasa mkiongeza miaka ije tena another 7 years. Na mnajua kweli Kenya hii, nasema wacha tuseme ukweli. Kiti ilikuwa Central Kenya. Ikatoka Central ikaenda Rift. Ikakaka ikarudi Central. Sasa imeenda Rift. Na mnasema muongeza miaka 7. Na sisi wengine tutafikiwa lini?
Hiyo maneno ya kucheza na term limit ya president. Ati ufikirie Ruto atatutawala miaka ingine 14, sahau. Sahau, haitawezekana.
Mtu ni miaka yako 5, unakuja unaomba ingine, wananchi wakikubali kukupatia ingine 5, that is over. Unaenda nyumbani. Kenya ni kubwa, lazima watu wengine pia wapate nafasi ya kuongoza nchi.
Kama Kenya Kwanza, sisi tunaunga mkono yale mazungumzo kati ya Kenya Kwanza na Azimio. Tunaunga mkono 100% kwa sababu tunataka amani Kenya hii.
I am one person who is supporting this bipartisan talks fully. Na sio kwa sababu mimi ni muoga. Hata watu wengi mimi wananijua mimi ni mtu ya vita.
Tunaomba wale ambao wako katika yale mazungumzo, there are some things that are of great priority to Kenyans, kama hii mambo ya IEBC. Yale mengine sioni yakiwa na uzito na umuhimu hivyo kwa wananchi.
Hatuwezi support constituencies kuwa reduced. Sisi tunataka hata constituencies ziendelee kupanda juu. Kama hii Sabatia yetu tugawe mara 2. Kukuwe na ile ya kule chini, kukuwe na huku juu. Tuwe na constituencies 2, CDF ikuwe chini, ingine juu, ili hao wananchi wetu wafikiwe kwa urahisi.
Kuna watu wanakimbia makotini, wanasema nini kwa makoti, sijui nini. Wanataka kuleta koti katika arena ya siasa. Na tukifanya namna hiyo tunaharibu.
Kuna mzee anaitwa Githu Muigai. Ameanza kuleta madharau. Na hiyo ni kiburi kwa Wakenya. Wewe wakati ulikuwa Attorney General, mbona hukufanya mambo haya? Wachana na sisi, wachana na president, wachana na serikali ya saa hii, ielekeze Wakenya mahali panafaa.
The biggest problem in the country today is the high cost of living, over-taxation, increase in fuel prices and unemployment.
Wewe ukipewa nafasi ya kuongoza, ukuwe ni mtu ya kushikanisha watu na kuheshimu wale viongozi wengine na kuheshimu wa Kenya na kuwafanyia kazi na ile njia ambaye inayofaa.
We are perturbed by the decision to have the port privatized or concessioned without public participation and the involvement of county government of Mombasa.
The port will not be privatized. We are going to work on a concession process that is going to make sure that we protect the interests of Kenya.
We want the talks to be people-centered, focused, and that there must be a show of commitment by all parties.
This is a Kenyan process. Haya majadiliano ni mambo ya kinyumbani ya Wakenya. We do not want dialogue amongst Kenyans to be funded by foreigners. Hatutaki watu wa nje wawe wale ambao wanasema wanafund mazungumzo haya. Wazungumuze na pesa ziwe za Wakenya, ndio zihakikishe kwamba yale tunazungumza it is truly a Kenyan product, not a foreign product.
Exactly the questions that we were raising regarding the funding of this particular forum from the civil society that Imani Shungo was raising, and a raft of other issues that are being also peppered there from, I can see Member of Parliament there, Clement Siloha as well. Question, what we're discussing regarding the IG's also sentiments, the former IG, regarding scrapping the women rep. This is where we are at. And I just want to hark back. I think it was you that you had to circle back. But Gladys also, I remember in 2019, when we were on the other side of the tracks as well, you had come up with a bill. And you are, in that particular bill, still on gender, you are proposing that there should be scrapping of the nominated seats, especially in the Senate or at the National Assembly for the women. You'll clarify that, because I know it got lost through the shuffle. I don't know where it is at right now, and you'll tell us more about it. How then is it reflective of what also the IG is saying? But Nikal, you wanted to say something.
What I want to say that this two-thirds thing, it's a very simple arithmetic thing. It is impossible to predict a number through an electoral process. So the only thing we really need to do is actually decide through seats what we can manipulate as the seats. So we say whether we are talking about women rep or the Senate people, and then take Parliament as a whole. Whatever we start with before we go to the Assembly to discuss must be giving us 2/3 the number. So it is what the elections will now do is to pick the people who go into those positions. That's the only way we can do it.
And that is the remit of who?
Yeah, that
of the parties.
Yeah, that is. They have tried nominations.
It never worked.
It never worked.
So
because
you can't say it's very simple and this.
No, it is. What is difficult for us is to accept that if we want to do it as it is very expensive. That is what really we are worried about, because we have done it. We have used exactly the same formula with the counties. What we have done is, and the same constitution actually provided for that in the counties, so that the deficit for either gender is nominated. And if we do it in Parliament, the number will be very large. We'll be having over 500 members of the National Assembly to begin with, before, if no woman is elected at all. So my position has always been, we can come with many suggestions, but every suggestion must create seats that will get us 2/3. So then we can discuss all those formulas that are made, so that by the time we are going to the election, the seats themselves have given us the 2/3. So what we are doing with elections is how we are now filling those seats. If we don't do that, then we just must go back and change the constitution and not put a fixed number.
Right. But
that is really the only way.
So there's a working party of mainstreaming the gender issue that has been formulated from the Ministry of Gender, and is seeking 150 seats as nominated seats. So that will be adding to the 349 seats we have in Parliament. We're talking about 500 seats in Parliament. Do you even have the infrastructure to accommodate this other 150 in Parliament?
We don't have that infrastructure. So we have only two options. people have tried. We try a combination of putting the seats together, combination of seats, how many women rep, how many senators, and so on. And if it is within the constitution, so that by the time we are going to the election, we have the numbers, then we elect the people. Or we just go back and change the constitution and say make it progressive, then it will go like that. Because we are doing a very simple thing, and I'm seeing this increasingly in this country, that we are ignoring technical things and we try to force them politically. It doesn't work. So this is really where we are in terms with 2/3. Once you agree on that, it will be smooth sailing.
Dan Mazo.
Yes.
So the question would be, he says it's very simple. It appears it is a holy grail for us. You have a National Gender and Equality Commission. Simply also to make sure that we mainstream gender. It's never happened. We have a youth and gender ministry. Still, we are grappling with these issues. We have it in the constitution that you said, oh, even there is a progressive, there's a sunset clause to it. We've had debates, we've had bills, Duale bill. Gladys Bostrele, you've come up with your own bill as well. Still, we've never shaken into place. If it is as simple as Dr. Nyikali is putting it, why are we not yet there? And do we need another presidential, is it the working party on gender?
Well,
do we need it?
I don't think so, but what is happening with the gender commissions and all these are just proposals. Finally, they must go to a bill. They either get voted on the floor of the House or go to referendum. Eventually, you know, there will be a vote. Whatever opinion, whatever ideas, whatever proposals, finally there will be a vote either in the House or by the people. And that has happened in the past, even in the House, and the bill has failed to go through. Now, the Constitution remains with a very high, you know, threshold that we should have this gender rule fulfilled. And I think it should be open and is practical, that it becomes progressive. Increasingly every year we are having more women elected in the House, and maybe one day it will be men who will be minority. So if you look at it, it's something.
That's what Gladys is telling you. Should embrace this right now. It will be for your own benefit in future.
It should be work on progress and it should not be punitive. You see, the Constitution is not supposed to be punitive. It's supposed to make sure that the country moves on. And these are some of the things, although they are not in bipartisan talks, is one of the main issues in the country we should be really dealt with in one way or another.
I think it's supposed to be one of the 5 pillars in the bipartisan talks.
Yeah, but unfortunately it wasn't put there, although it's a very thorny issue. And you know, leadership can be provided by either gender. And I believe, you know, we should also at the same time follow our Constitution. Remember there was one time this came to the House and even it went to court, and the court ruled that the Parliament was unconstitutionally constituted and therefore should be disbanded. It took the wisdom, you know, it took the wisdom of President Uhuru Kenyatta to navigate through that, because it puts the country into a crisis. We should not have a constitution which puts the country into a crisis. The constitution should be facilitatory. The law is made for man, not man for the law.
Yeah, Isaac, before we come to Gladys.
I think, first and foremost, I want to disabuse the notion that nominated slots are not useful. Why not for those that would not have been a member of parliament and a senator? Gladys Sholay would not have been a women rep. Wanga would not have become a governor. Sakaja would not have become a governor. And you can go on even with Tangula, Uhuru Kenyatta. So nomination slots are extremely important to bring to the fore groups of people who would otherwise not have made it to parliament because of the structural challenges of representation. And you can see out of those slots, the bar, there has been inspiration even for other people to elect women, persons with disabilities. Even Tim Wanyonyi started as a nominated councillor. He now wants to be governor of Nairobi. So let us not try to demonize nomination slots, because they sometimes they look like an underclass or affirmative action. They are like an underclass within parliament. And I have told you this before. The strongest position in parliament is that of a single member constituency, followed by a senator because it's male dominated, followed by a women rep, and then the nominated. That is the caste system in Parliament. But it's a very good springboard for future leaders who would otherwise not have had an opportunity. But be that as it may, the issue of gender,
2/3.
it is not a rule, it is a principle. And a principle is progressive. A rule is mandatory. That is where the gender, there's a confusion. And women are very interesting. They are very good at strategizing. They go and agree with the AG. Helen Muigai, the same person who is saying women should be taken away from Parliament. And then they say it's a rule. There's no rule. And in fact, the courts erred. Because if you look at Article 81B, it talks about principle of not more than 1/3. You can check the Constitution, Article 81B. So, for me, I strongly believe there is nothing to dissolve Parliament. There is nothing to make Parliament bloated by having 100 nominated members of Parliament. And any change that would occasion a fairer representation of women is a referendum issue. It will change, it will alter the structure of Parliament. Now, for example, if you look at the Senate, which I have just come from serving, Priscilla Nyokabi was very good at lobbying the BBI process to have 2 senators, a man and a woman. But then they were doing away with the representation of persons with disabilities. A man and a woman. How would those be elected? The youth, a man and a woman. Even ethnic minorities, for example, because if you look at how parties have been nominating those 4 slots, you'll find an Ogiek who also comes in as a youth. You get it? And so therefore, Debal, let us also not over-exaggerate the issue of women to the detriment of other groups of minorities. Because at times we are doing so. I even saw my party, UDA, trying to do the same. And yet we don't even have a secretary for disability affairs in the NEC. The UDA Disability League is not recognized in the Constitution. So let us not go for the overkill. For me, I think there could be formulae, and the President has actually proposed through a memorandum to Parliament. But then it is a principle, it's not a rule.
All right, Gladys, it is a principle, it's not the rule, and of course, 81B stipulates that.
Yes, first of all, we just have to remind ourselves of Article 81 of our Constitution, which says the electoral system shall comply with the following principles. And I'll go straight to the relevant ones, which is B. Not more than 2/3 of the members of elective public bodies shall be of the same gender. Yeah? Shall. It's a mandatory.
That was
and in any case, even if we forget the wording of shall in our Constitution was not by mistake. Because, like I said, Kenya is a signatory and has ratified the United Nations Convention on Human Rights. Human rights are not realizable progressively. They are realizable immediately. The rights that are realizable progressively are social and economic rights. Rights to housing, rights to the best attainable standard of health care, and so on. Rights to clean water, rights to food and food that is safe. Those are social economic rights. They are realizable progressively. Human rights are realizable immediately. Hence the reason why our Constitution put it at shall. And again, I'm saying that previously there's been several attempts to be able to implement Article 81. The only reason why it has not been implemented successfully was because of lack of political goodwill. Githu Muigai was the one who first went to the Supreme Court for an advisory opinion. He was given 5 years to ensure that Parliament passes the legislation. There was the Duale 1, Duale 2, Chepkonga, there was the Boss Bill 1, Boss Bill 2. Now, on the second one that has come in now, I think because there's political goodwill from government, then, and the head of state, I have withdrawn my bill, and it is going to be spearheaded by the majority leader as a government bill, because that way it will move faster than when it's a private member's bill. And so, there is, but the women's movement, for even before the time that the 2010 Constitution was promulgated, there had been a lot of work done and research done from the times of Niva Mwendwa and Justice Joyce Alwatch and so on. This has been discussion since that time, and we've built on that, and several formulas have come up. there is a formula that says, in the Senate, because the nominated women to Senate are not able to vote because they're not considered a delegate of their county, we said we want to make them participate. We don't want to nominate them and have them in parliament as flower girls. We want to make them be able to make serious decisions. So hence the reason why there is a formula where we say, let every county elect 2 senators, 1 male, 1 female, running on a joint ticket, like is the case for governor and deputy governor, or president and deputy president. That's one way of achieving it within the Senate. And then the nominations can be reserved for those special groups and marginalized groups that have not made it through that process. The good thing about also electing a majority of these members is that it gives them a platform and a legitimacy. Because when you're elected, you have legitimacy. So yes, we need nominated members, as Honorable Isaac Mwaura has said, but we don't want it to be the larger number. So that what we're actually trying to do is to ensure that women are able to be elected. You give them a platform where they can work, where they can participate. So the mindset of the society, which is largely patriarchal, and because of our cultures, they can begin to elect more women on their own volition. There was also the proposal that in the National Assembly that you create, you put three constituencies together. And maybe I give the example of Uasin Gishu County. Uasin Gishu County has 6 constituencies. And there is and as a woman representative, you run on 6 constituencies. So now what they would do is pair 3 constituencies together, and have one woman that electoral area of 3 run by a woman and the other one run by a woman exclusively. So we'd end up with 2 women, which means that you have a higher chance of having the right number of women. Of course, you will, if there is a shortfall after elections, at least it will be a small shortfall that can be dealt with through the usual nomination process. There's also been other suggestions that currently, according to the Constitution, the composition of Parliament is 349 MPs. So if you are to look to ensure that there is 1/3, and you count the number of women who've been elected, which currently is 27, because we lost 1 seat when Alice Wahome became CS. So if you calculate that, the number will be huge. It will get to 90 that we need to nominate to bring the current number of women in Parliament to meet Article 81. So the thought had been, because we understand that there's hard times, and discussions have been held at a preliminary level on this, because there's hard times, we are trying not to hire extra MPs, and we also don't have the facilities or the infrastructure to house them. It was felt that we can have a constitutional amendment that does not require a referendum to say the composition of Parliament is 349. But for the purposes of achieving the 1/3 gender principle, it will be considered at 290. Which means in this case, if we made that amendment, we would nominate 21 women to Parliament in this particular current sitting of Parliament. But pass another law so that in the next electoral cycle, we'll find a way of these 21 being able to be elected and not nominated. So there's many formulas. I think the matter is to, when it comes before the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee and through public participation, people like Honorable Nikal, who have very good ideas on this issue, then can be able to say, maybe we should take the issue of amending the Constitution to just indicate that 349 is the composition of Parliament, but for purposes of the 1/3 gender principle, it shall be counted at the constituencies, which is 290. Convincing Kenyans that we nominate 21 members of Parliament is easy. At the moment, Senate is properly constituted. So we don't have a problem with Senate. So for this cycle, and the hope had been, when we signed the Kenya Kwanza Women's Charter, was that we could have a stopgap measure like that. Yeah. So in that case, that is my idea of progressive, Honorable Mwaura, but not holistically. So we can find a way of having an intervention that can happen now. And the way I see it at the moment, there isn't too much objection about that. So it's what formula do we use? but also taking into account the economic situation.
All right, so
of the country.
is the figure 90 that is proposed, but the working party on this suggests from the Minister of
But
Gender
even as
is
we-
150. What
Sorry?
really informs the 150 figure from the Ministry of Gender with the working party?
I think if they just took the entire number of
I'll
150.
tell you how that works.
So,
You see, when you are doing this mathematically, because the moment we put a figure, we put ourselves into maths. We removed ourselves from anything else. That we went to put a number. So mathematically, that figure I think will come if you assume no woman is elected at all. So if you say no woman is elected at all, then you go with the women reps, then you go with all, and you take all the other nominations that are now allowed for women and put all of them, then you will get that number. Now what reduces it practically as of now, as he's saying, because some women have gotten themselves elected anyway.
Yeah, we already
so they
have
have taken
28.
the number. So if you are
So we
talking
only need
absolute,
21.
if you are
Yeah.
talking of absolute figures, then you will assume at this time no woman is elected at all on their own. So all the 290 constituencies are basically men. If you do that, the figure comes to 150.
All right,
and that's what we are afraid of.
all right,
Yes, and I think that would be wrong to use the figure as
Yes.
if women are not elected. I think now we can tell ourselves, so far we got 28 women elected. I don't think we'll go below that.
Let me tell
Something terrible has to have happened. So I think we can use that as the base. But remember, even if we are off by a few seats, we have the nomination slots that can be used
to fill in.
to be able to cure that. And and that's why I said it's got to do with agreeing. I've seen there's some arguments that were made that it's too expensive, representation is too expensive. But I think the last assessment that was done by the women's movement, it showed that 63% of the budget goes to the executive. Then I think 20% to the consolidated fund services, and then 15% I think was going to the counties, and I think representation was at 1.5. Even if it's increased now, it's probably at 2%. So the cost is not
The issue.
should not be the issue.
Okay.
It is an argument that is used as a scapegoat, because if we are to go in that direction, so let's not allow that conversation about the cost.
Okay.
That is not a factor that is.
There has been a sunset clause that has oftentimes been quoted. Oh, it's progressive. You say here it's not supposed to be progressive. It's a human rights issue, so that's it should be immediate.
Just look at the international human rights instruments.
Where is this progressive clause that people have been talking about? Was it a bill or it is in the constitution? Maybe for my own education.
I think the advisory opinion by the Supreme Court.
There was an advisory
I think
opinion.
was it in which year was it? 2013. 2013, 2014, when there was advisory opinion which was actually requested by Gidu Muigai, then when he was Attorney General. At that time, the Supreme Court felt that the turnaround time was too short, so it said the Constitution was promulgated in 2010, so we are going to give it 5 years, so they gave up to 2017 to do that. And then 2017, it was an election year. There were other pronouncements where the Uhuru cabinet was declared unconstitutional and so on, but they were told, because you're going to an election after the next election in 2017, you should arrange that so that you're compliant with the Constitution. That did not happen, and that is when the parties went to Parliament. The women's movement went to Parliament, and at that time, then the court said that Parliament gave 60 days under Justice Mumbi, 60 days to Parliament and the Attorney General to immediately put a legislation in Parliament. They did put it, it failed, and thereafter the law is clear that if Parliament does not implement any of the articles within the required time frame, then anybody has a right to move the High Court for an order of dissolution of Parliament, which is what happened. And as we sit today, there is a live advisory opinion on the desk of the head of state. It did not expire with the Uhuru government. it is still valid. And remember, the opinion of the president was not being sought.
Yes.
The president, as per law, is required upon receiving the advisory opinion is to just make a proclamation. And the reason why the current head of state has not made that proclamation, despite his very clear views about women's representation or adhering to the 2/3 gender principle or the 1/3 gender principle, as you may call it, is because he's already communicated to Parliament and is trying to move amendments, and which are going to be led by the majority leader as person who pushes government bills.
Thank you.
So we are at a good place.
We need to be winding up right now.
Can I say that?
Can we hear from Dan Mazu? He hasn't spoken for a while on this,
Well,
especially from the Senate side.
On this particular matter, you know, it's interesting how President Uhuru handled it and how also President William Ruto is handling it. In fact, from many other things, when President Ruto was opposition within government, he seems now to be reading from the book written by President Uhuru on these particular issues. And he seems, as much as he wants to depart from President Kenyatta, he is going back, you know, in many, many things. And right now he has behaved the same way President Kenyatta did. And I think it's a matter which is very contentious. It's a matter which needs careful interpretation. Probably the interpretation of the cause and the advisory opinions may not have been right. The Constitution clearly says this is a principle. And again, it doesn't fall within the closets of human rights. You know, we have the provisions of human rights. It doesn't squarely follow there. It's clearly an issue of representation, and I think it should be achieved gradually. We have tried it in Parliament many times to force it. It has not worked. Probably it is a high time it was taken back to the people through a referendum. But as Honorable Maura said, there is no single likelihood of any referendum before 2027.
I think the bill, as Senator Manzo has put it across, you cannot force people to elect a certain gender. And I will refer you to Article 54, sub-article 2 of the Constitution on the persons with disabilities. It says it shall be achieved progressively. Now, Gladys, Deputy Speaker here, is saying
human rights,
no, they are not. I beg to differ with her on this one. Human rights are inherent, inalienable. The fact that you have the right to food does not mean you have to have food on the table. It doesn't mean so.
Food is a social economic right,
yes,
not
exactly.
a human right.
Yes, no, it's a socio-economic human right. It's a second generation right. And so therefore, really,
so it's progressive.
The argument that the women have advanced to even say that Parliament should be dissolved, for me it is erroneous, it is wrong, it is not based on in law.
Because you're not a woman.
No. Let me explain. Because it is a principle, and the principle is progressive, and shall also include may. Let's explain that. So what is the idea here? Differentiate between two things. Because we voted the Duale bill in the 11th Parliament, it flopped. And I can tell you, Parliament is not going to pass that law. That one I can assure you. Number two, just differentiate. Have appointed positions to be mandatory. Cabinet, PSS, and all other manner of appointments. Let it be 1/3 of either gender. But elective, let it be progressive. Why? The number of single-member constituency elected women has increased. And Gladys is saying we are unlikely to go down to 28, from 28 downwards. So people are appreciating the progress of women in leadership. Even in other democracies like America, there is no such law, by the way. Show me and I will. There is no such law that compels the populace to elect a certain group of people. Even America has just had its first elected vice president after over 200 years. So my take is, without us, trying to force Parliament to be dissolved, so even if you are to dissolve Parliament, so what? You'll get into a constitutional crisis. You'll go back to an election without even the relevant law to create that to that gender. Have the appointed positions mandatory, because you cannot argue that appointive cannot be made. It's not possible. And even to go with what Gladys is saying, if the executive has 63% of the resources, the more reason why appointive there will be millions of women who will benefit more from appointed position than a few who are elected in parliament to bloat it to 300 plus. If you are to look at even the formula that Gladys has said, if you are to add 21, the goalpost shifts. That new number, there will be a new third. Somebody will rush to court and say, still parliament is not properly constituted. Look at the Senate. We have 5 women. We have 3 women elected. That is the senator for Nakuru, the senator for Isiolo, and the senator for, I forget the other place. So those are the women that are trying, because of the numbers of nomination, that are trying to bring Senate to closer to, but it is slightly less. If you calculate properly, it still doesn't. You need 1 extra woman to be elected to make Senate to be properly constituted. And if you are to do so, then you would say it is properly constituted. However, this formula will not be forced because it's an elective, it is universal suffrage. But on appointed positions, I fully agree that needs to be done like yesterday.
Let me just, these words that are confusing. This constitution is very clear. You know, on the 81B, it is shall. It is not further on making a statement. What is quoting 54 is talking with persons with disabilities. And under 54, it goes down to clarify that the state shall ensure the progressive implementation of the principle that at least 5% of the members of the public in elective and appointed bodies are persons with disability. It has qualified that. If you go to the chapter 4, which are the human rights, it goes, and then under 27, it then goes to 27(6), to give full effect to the realization of the rights under this, the state shall at least make legislative and other methods, including affirmative action and so on. And if you go under 8, again, in addition to these measures. So what happened at the time we are making the constitution? We put one in 81B, but we didn't give space. So I agree with that. Let what people should do, get all formula which will give us the number we want in the structure, which then we subject to election. So it is all those formula, and we look at each one of them, takes care of our need, including our economic status, and we then settle on that one. But if we just keep talking, God's things, that is nature, they don't care about human beings. The number is 3. You can stream until morning, it's a 3. Yeah.
Right. Let me come back, even as you prepare our headline thoughts. Yes. We are leaving, actually. Time is up, right? Let me just ask Gladys, because we had the Women Charter that was unveiled, at Nyayo National Stadium. What was the rhyme and reason for this Women Charter from the Kenya Kwanza government?
The thought behind it is that there had previously been presidents that had, and candidates who had in their manifesto a commitment that they shall ensure that the 1/3 gender principle is adhered to. If you remember the Jubilee manifesto, a party that I was a member of, page 30 of its manifesto in 2017 and 2013 indicated that they will ensure the realization of the 1/3 gender principle as envisaged in the Constitution. But thereafter, after they got into office, there was no political goodwill. During our campaigns, the women asked, how sure are we that, because at that time we realized what lacked in the Jubilee administration was the political goodwill, more so from the head of state. It was not priority anymore. And because all it takes is a party leader with a majority in parliament to whip their members and say, this is the position of the party and we'll all be required to vote in that sense. That did not happen in the Duale 1, Duale 2 and the Chepkonga bill. That's why it failed. Because many times when there's been tax being passed in parliament and so on, there's a party position. So at that time, the women sought conversations with the candidate at that time, and the candidate himself volunteered and said that I shall sign a personal commitment, let alone the UDA commitment in its manifesto. And that's why you saw that the charter was, I, Dr. William Ruto, undertake that once I'm president, I shall give my full support for the implementation an actualization of the 1/3 gender principle. So it was a personal commitment, so that we are not saying it's the party didn't agree, and we thought the personal commitment coming from the party leader was powerful. And so far it has bore fruit by his communique to Parliament. So basically that communique is clear that that is the government position, and if obviously it will be a party position. So I think the closest we've come to getting a commitment from the highest office in the country is here with us. What is still at play? And of course, the formula cannot be dictated by the head of state. The formula has to be an initiative of members of parliament through private members' bills. Again, there is a majority leader is also has come in on that. And then the discussions will be held at the public participation during the hearings at the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, because members now of parliament can decide which is the best formula. And I think today, as I sit, when I compare with the last parliament, when I tried to bring in the constitutional amendment bill, there was lack of goodwill. People didn't understand it. There was a whole talk about cost, and that's why we went back and calculated what the costs are. This time, I see more and more that there is goodwill, even from members of parliament, from both parts of the political divide. What people want is to have a formula that is reasonable, that is logical, that is sustainable, and acceptable, taking into account the economic situation of the country.
Right,
so I think there is much more hope.
Right, thank you. We need to wind up, and I just want to get headline thoughts from Dan Mazo, especially with the editorial cartoon that we've had also recently of Mwangaza, Governor Mwangaza, and what is happening with the MCAs currently. We can see a lot of this impeachment motions being raised every which way, and now the Council of Governors is calling upon a mainstreaming of a law to try and secure them. We're going. Just hold on. Don't be in a tearing rush. We are.
I'll just be very brief. I think impeachments, are very political in nature, and unfortunately, that's an area we need to look when we look at reviewing the constitution in the future. Ordinarily, the mandate comes from people, and then when it comes to impeachment, the mandate comes from a few elected people. So I think it's an area which needs further research. The practice I've seen in the Senate is that it's purely political. You may be impeachable, but you are saved politically. You may be unimpeachable, but you are finished politically.
You finished politically. Your headline thoughts.
Yes,
that's your headline thoughts. Right, yes. Thank you. Let's hear from Dr. Ika. Your headline thoughts. I can see you pulling back.
Headline thoughts.
I know you're pinched for time.
One, with the bipartisan, let these people do their 60 days. We put them to task to give us the results. On 2/3, let's get formula that give us the numbers before we even go to the election. Otherwise, we won't get there.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, on the issue of impeachment, I think Senate and the MCAs should borrow a leaf from Parliament. There was several rulings, especially during the tenure of Marende as Speaker and the tenure of JB Muturi, now Attorney General, during their tenure. They put in a threshold for impeaching of cabinet secretaries or the president. So you actually required not only to bring the grounds for impeachment, but corresponding evidence for each ground. If you did not submit that, then the Speaker would not admit your impeachment motion. So it was not just about getting signatures and making allegations. They have to have corresponding evidence. I think if that standard was applied at the county assembly, then in fact it would be easier for Senate to do its job when it does come to Senate. So I think and that's something that Senate can take up. I know it's been raised by the
Council of
Governors, but I think really Senate should fine-tune the regulations around that, so that you are able to advise the MCAs.
Right, thank you. Finally,
then we won't have the lynch mobbing mentality that exists.
Thank you. Maura, your closing remarks briefly.
I think the impeachment procedure bill needs to be put in place. I don't know how far it went. It was introduced in the Senate, went to the National Assembly. If it was not enacted, it needs to be very clear, because sometimes the Senate has a problem whether going the plenary or the committee way. That's number one. But I think Kadwera Mwangaza is dealing with patriarchy, but the way she's going about it is wrong. She's fronting now the first gentleman, if you can call him that way, and now they are being caricatured. There is a video going around about them dancing and, you know, funny things like those mattresses and cows and whatever. You know, there's a way you also play into the hands of your detractors. So I wish you could have handled it better, but I can tell for sure there's an element of inexperience and patriarchy all joined together. And it works very badly on new pioneer trailblazers like herself in such a region. Mm-hmm. I hope she can survive this one.
So it's a whole issue of a patriarchy. Thank you.
Yes.
I really do appreciate your contribution this morning. We discussed very deeply these issues, and we hope at least there will be traction, especially in the mainstreaming of the principle of 1/3 gender rule. It's a part of the discussion of the National Dialogue Committee as well. And, well, it was an also for Azimio and Kenya Kwanza on this NDC. I thought this was their thing. So we failed to understand why they're not really showing up also for the dialogue. Why? That's a question also we'll broach. They are represented. No, but the Daily also says we didn't see any of them. They were not sure. They are represented. So we are assuming if Kalonzo is there as a co-chair and Ishungwa, they are uncoupled from the people who are appearing there. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate and Deputy Speaker.